Homage to fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to wisdom warrior Manjushri, homage to all lineage benevolent masters. The Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in a million eons. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta, below we discuss the sufferings of human beings. Previously, we've introduced the three fundamental sufferings: suffering of change, and all-pervasive suffering. This is the words of my perfect teacher, right? Among the 8 specific sufferings, birth, aging, sickness, and death have all been introduced. Today we begin discussing the 5th one, the suffering of encountering what is unwanted. What exactly is the suffering of encountering what is unwanted? We should all understand this very clearly. People living in this world all experience various external sufferings they don't want to accept. For example, one cannot obtain the loved ones one wishes to have instead. One often encounters hateful enemies, even those with whom relationships aren't good. One often meets on the road, and the road is narrow, so one frequently encounters them. One also frequently hears various things one doesn't want to hear. At the same time, one doesn't want to contract various diseases in one's own body, wanting to live healthy and well. Yet often many illness demons cling to oneself without freedom, without happiness. So living in this world, everyone should be able to feel that unwanted external circumstances constantly appear, while the objects one particularly seeks and wants to obtain become increasingly distant. Intense suffering arises in the heart. This is the nature of samsara. So this suffering of encountering what is unwanted is actually many unlovable objects frequently falling upon oneself. The Abhidharma Mahavibhasa Shastra explains, when unlovable objects unite with the body, they generate various sufferings, hence called the suffering of unwanted encounters. The meaning is that unlovable objects frequently appear on one's body or before oneself. Because bad objects appear, sentient beings generate various different sufferings, so it's called the suffering of encountering what is unwanted. Of course, the true meaning of the suffering of encountering what is unwanted has many different explanatory methods. When can we eliminate this kind of suffering? When one realizes emptiness and completely understands that personal self and phenomenal self don't exist at that time, all these sufferings will disappear without a trace. Not even the slightest bit can be found. So before this, no matter what kind of samsara we're reborn into, this will exist. For example, among humans we often have unlovable objects. If we're reborn in hell as animals or as hungry ghosts, needless to say, if we're reborn among animals actually, sometimes when we see animals, they often don't encounter lovable objects instead. Unwanted external circumstances often appear. So if we want to be free from this kind of suffering, actually transcending birth and death, or realizing emptiness is very important. The Mahaparinirvana Sutra also states, if one hasn't understood the unborn, in all places of birth, there's nothing but resentment, nothing but suffering. If we haven't thoroughly understood the principle of unborn emptiness, then before this, wherever we're reborn, human realm, God realm, whichever group of beings among the 6 realms, this environment is nothing but a resentful group, nothing but a source of suffering. Some people think the environment here is too complex. I want to go to a particularly pure place. Actually, this reflects a lack of understanding about external circumstances and samsara. I feel that if you truly understand the nature of all samsara or its condition, then no matter where you go, there will be disagreeable objects. When these disagreeable objects are grasped and clung to, suffering is produced. Only when you have some recognition of their nature at this time, you might also feel it's not worth producing suffering. A book once said, the thing I was particularly attached to 10 years ago, when I think of it today, is a particularly ridiculous matter. The thing I'm attached to today, if I recall it again after 10 more years, it will be the same. So the focal point of each time period, the things one is attached to at this moment, one should understand their nature. Some people understand when reviewing history When conversing with some elderly people, now some elderly people say this, they say that previously, when participating in the Red Guards and the Cultural Revolution, some behaviors at that time, when they think of them now, they feel they were completely in a state of madness at that time. Why did we act that way then? Some people say this. Some of us are the same. For example, some elderly people think about what your attachment to toys was like during childhood when you were young, how you were attached to emotions, fame, wealth, and sensual pleasures. When I think of it now, oh, my suffering at that time, my behavior at that time, I shouldn't have been attached to that. So now we're particularly attached to many things every day, including our own body and external circumstances. We're particularly attached every day, and we think these are things that especially deserve attachment. Actually, after some more time passes, as the years flow by, one's mood will also continuously change. Of course, if you understand some meaning of the unborn at this time, you'll truly think that all your previous actions or thoughts all have no real true meaning. So when discussing human suffering, observing life is very important, because now many people cannot master the conditions of their lives. If you cannot master the conditions of your life, as long as you don't achieve your goals or meet your requirements, people become extremely distressed from deep within their hearts, even pushing themselves into an abyss of despair. There's this danger and possibility. So if we have some recognition of Buddhism's truth of emptiness, even if you haven't completely understood the truth of emptiness regarding worldly matters, including impermanent phenomena, humanity's past history, or the experiences of one's own life all accumulated together, then you use your wisdom to analyze and observe. At this time, the things people are particularly attached to are actually illusory and false. Of course, before we completely understand the true nature of all phenomena, attachment to suffering and attachment to happiness cannot be abandoned. Once you completely eliminate afflictive and cognitive obscurations, or completely eliminate afflictive obscurations, you won't be attached to I and suffering. At that time, you also won't be led by karma into the 3 lower realms. So as Buddhists, we of course need to understand these principles, but understanding alone isn't enough. Therefore, we now need to contemplate each word, each sentence, contemplate paragraph by paragraph. In the process of contemplation, do you have any insights? Actually, this kind of insight is what's called actual practice. Some people always say, I don't want to study and contemplate now, I want to practice. Actually, practice separated from study and contemplation is indeed very dangerous. Because if you have no foundation of study and contemplation, how can you practice? Some people think so-called practice means not being attached to anything, sitting with eyes closed every day like this. Some people think so-called practice might be skipping all the previous stages, just taking the most profound parts of Vajrayana or Zen and directly visualizing. Of course, for extremely rare sudden enlightenment practitioners, we also can't be certain that no profound realizations will appear. We don't slander this way either, but for most people our faculties are sequential and gradual. Why? We can see this from worldly matters too. When we grow up in this world we study, first elementary school, then middle school, then university. We don't directly enter university gates and graduate with a doctorate. This way, even worldly wisdom doesn't exist regarding transcendental matters. If we have some transcendent qualities such as faith or transcendent diligence, whether we have the so-called 5 faculties. If we do, there are also special cases, because disciples with particularly great faith relying on enlightened teachers, extremely few pith instructions can immediately achieve sudden enlightenment. Such history is not non-existent either, but whether such conditions are present should be clear when observing oneself. So now we slowly understand from theory. Then when we actually practice each principle, actually our mind should also be able to change, and afflictions will gradually decrease. Previous great masters also relied on this kind of spiritual path to understand and recognize the nature of their own minds. So when we're now teaching the preliminary practices, everyone must deeply contemplate each being's suffering, especially the human suffering we're now discussing. The Buddha also described human suffering very extensively in the sutras. Great masters have also described it with such detail in their treatises. Whether we later students actually practice and contemplate according to the sutras and treatises, this can only be known by introspectively examining and observing oneself. Here it explains that many people worry about their wealth being robbed, so they guard during the day and patrol continuously at night. People in big cities nowadays live in fear and are extremely attached to their possessions. I've seen in Argentina, they themselves don't want to do this, but because they fear robbers, every house is surrounded by walls completely covered with electric fences. It's no different from a prison. They don't actually want this either, but they have no choice. Now, in many cities in Han areas too, windows must be fitted with various security bars and doors. Without them, there's no sense of security. Why is this? Some may be to protect their lives, others to protect their property. When we think more deeply about the true nature of property, it is actually the root of all suffering. So when one has property, suffering naturally descends. Therefore, when Patrul Rinpoche speaks of the suffering of meeting the unwanted, he mainly discusses the faults of property. Actually, the suffering of meeting the unwanted, broadly speaking, refers to all unpleasant circumstances that you encounter. In our daily lives, we often encounter troubles and distressing situations. These are all unwanted circumstances that impact us. But here, we mainly discuss property, because as practitioners, we need to be content with little desire. In this process, property also creates certain obstacles for you. Most people spend their entire lives busily making ends meet, but what is the result? It's futile. All property and possessions will unexpectedly fall into the hands of enemies. So many people's property is brazenly seized by bandits during the day and secretly stolen by thieves at night. There are also properties like cattle and sheep in pastoral areas. Wolves and wild beasts will arrive unexpectedly and wantonly ravage and destroy their lives, leaving everything in ruins with nothing remaining. This becomes very painful. So nowadays, some big cities are also very frightening. In December 2009, there was a woman who was preparing to withdraw money at an ATM at the bank when suddenly someone appeared beside her, holding a gun and said she had just withdrawn over 10,000 yuan, and he told her, "Give me the money or I'll kill you." At that moment, the owner was stunned and completely at a loss, in a state of extreme panic and terror. Then she had no choice but to give him the money. After giving the money, he immediately disappeared. This was probably around 8 o'clock in the evening. So in today's society, at any time, many people's money, houses, cars, and all kinds of property are constantly encountering various thieves and robbers. The other day, a fellow villager from our hometown came who works as a gatekeeper and security guard at a work unit in Sirtar County. He said that in the past month or so, in the small county town of Sirtar, about 15 homes had doors pried open or windows broken into. In any case, various thieves appeared. In the worst cases, they stole 70 to 80,000 yuan, and in the least, even very small items were stolen. This is a social security problem. Now people's greed is growing bigger and bigger, and human quality is declining more and more. Many people probably try every possible means with surveillance cameras and various anti-theft measures. What should be used has been used, but thieves also rely on advanced science to create various tools. If you install an iron door, they create something to pry open the iron door. Another kind of hammer or chisel can also be made. Once they're made, there's nothing you can do. Then installing 2 layers of iron doors doesn't work either. So our current society is really sometimes, if you don't observe carefully, humans are just like this. But if you observe carefully, people's inner compassion, altruism, and contentment with little desire, these very precious spiritual treasures are decreasing more and more, while external desires, cravings, and malice, many unwholesome mental states, are becoming increasingly severe. After this, our society, no matter what, now I hear that every year, various relevant political and legal departments, security bureaus and public security bureaus are constantly hiring more and more people. But even with more people, it's useless. Sometimes they themselves become corrupt and turn into bad people. After this, the entire society. Sometimes we all look at some people in the mountains who have no other goals except their simple food and clothing. True practitioners, from their external appearance, may have simple clothing and food, which might seem painful, but their spiritual happiness far exceeds that of some wealthy people in big cities. So I think many of our Dharma friends should often examine their own minds in the process of practice. What is our actual goal in living in this world? The people around us, what are their actions and behaviors really like? Using our own wisdom and intelligence to observe, the conclusion is not difficult to reach. In short, no matter what kind of wealth, it equally brings people first accumulation, then protection, and finally efforts to continuously increase the wealth, and so forth, endless suffering. Just as the protector Nagarjuna, who was personally prophesied by the Buddha, said, "Accumulating, guarding, and increasing wealth are all suffering. Know that wealth is the source of boundless misfortune." Humans first try every possible means day and night, racking their brains to accumulate property. Accumulating property is very hard work. Some say their goal is to go from zero to becoming wealthy, but very few truly succeed. When they have a little property, they desperately try to protect it. Just protecting it is not enough. For example, if a person has 10,000 yuan when he had no money, it didn't matter. With 10,000 yuan, he's unwilling to just keep guarding it. He must put it at high interest or rely on this 10,000 yuan to earn 20,000, 30,000 yuan. He has this goal. Then for the sake of increase, he also works extremely hard. So for the sake of this property, people are extremely exhausted. Therefore, especially for those of us studying Mahayana Buddhism, wise ones who understand the meaninglessness of property should understand that all worldly wealth has no real meaning and is the root of all misfortune, all suffering, and all unwholesome things. There was an American, I don't know if you've heard of him, called Fuller. He used to be quite poor, but later, through effort, he acquired $1 million. Then he wanted 2 million and finally became an extremely wealthy person. Later, he felt that for the sake of this property, he couldn't obtain true happiness, including his family, marriage, and status, including his own body, deteriorated day by day. Later he thought of every way to donate all his property to churches, charitable causes, educational endeavors, and so forth. Later he apparently provided housing for 300,000 people, building houses. He created homes for people in the world who had nothing and no one to rely on. He created such a realm called Habitat for Humanity. In the end, he basically disposed of all his property, and then he felt he was the wealthiest and happiest person in the world. They are all worldly people. Among worldly people, there are indeed those who see through this life. Their seeing through is not a complete understanding of the true nature of property, but perhaps they have a kind of optimism. At a certain point, they feel that property doesn't necessarily bring complete happiness to their lives, so we as practitioners should have even less attachment to property. The other day, someone said that when some people talk about the faults of money, he just can't understand it. He said he considers money to be a true wish-fulfilling jewel. You can eat with it, travel with it. Everything depends on money to accomplish. So he considers money to be a wish-fulfilling jewel that grants all accomplishments. There is such a view. But in Buddhism, as I mentioned some time ago, life, as consistently taught in the Buddhist sutras, the Buddhist view of life is not falling into two extremes, not falling into the extreme of extreme poverty, nor into the extreme of extreme wealth. This is the so-called middle way. One's food, clothing, housing, and transportation should have no problems. When we make aspirations, we also say, "May I not be born into an overly wealthy family, not be born into a poor family, but only be born into a middle-class family and constantly obtain ordination." We make such aspirations. Don't be reborn into too wealthy a family, and don't be reborn into too poor a family, but always be reborn into middle-class families, and in life after life, always obtain ordination. Such is our aspiration. As Milarepa also said, wealth initially brings self-pleasure and others envy. Though having much, one never knows contentment. Property, at the very beginning, makes one feel that through money, everything can be satisfied, bringing considerable happiness. At the same time, people are extremely envious. This person has become rich, has made a fortune. Others buy houses. Now, in cities, people constantly compare with each other like this. That person has a car. That person bought a house again. That person bought a second car. They keep thinking like this, very envious. Especially people feel that if others are very successful in terms of property, they are extremely delighted. So initially, property has this kind of function. In the middle, one is bound by the knots of miserliness and reluctant to use it for virtue. It becomes the root of demonic possession. What one accumulates, others use. So-called property in the middle phase, because when a person reaches a certain point and has a certain amount of wealth, miserliness naturally arises in the mind. This knot of miserliness constantly binds oneself and cannot possibly be untied. So after becoming miserly, this wealth is absolutely reluctant to be used for virtuous activities like offerings above and charity below. Moreover, actually relying on property, various resentments, various enemies, and all kinds of obstacles constantly appear, so it is a root of demonic possession. Later, the property one has accumulated is very likely to be used by others. These are some of the faults of wealth in the middle phase. Everyone can also see that people with a little money and wealth do very little in terms of true virtue and good deeds, but do much in useless matters. Also, a large group of people around them begin to enjoy their wealth, and their greed also grows bigger and bigger. So sometimes we see that the people around wealthy individuals each have greed that grows bigger day by day. So in the end, he himself enjoys very little. Finally, wealth becomes a demon that kills. Seeking enemies' wealth stabs the heart with pain. One should cut off samsara's bait. I do not seek demonic wealth. Milarepa said that finally, many people lose their most precious lives for the sake of property, so it is completely no different from demons. In the past, when Atisha came to Tibet, many Tibetans at that time, including some monastics, felt that since Atisha had come, they should welcome him well. Especially some monastics had gold, silver, and treasures adorning their bodies with many jeweled ornaments, and came forward to welcome Atisha. At that time, the master covered his head with his shawl and wouldn't look. When his attendants asked why, he said, "Many demons have come to welcome me." Then the disciples became somewhat afraid and told those welcoming people not to dress like that. Otherwise, Atisha would be very afraid, thinking they were demons. Later those people became afraid and immediately removed the ornaments from their bodies, then wore the 3 robes of monastics to welcome him. At that time the master appeared very happy. Why was Atisha afraid? He wasn't afraid of a coral bead or agate stone, but actually, if monastics especially adorn themselves with much gold, silver, and treasure, it's a very frightening thing. So generally speaking, in many scriptures, property is also compared to poison, fire, or various demonic obstacles. If you increasingly seek it, property becomes like an enemy stabbing into your heart. So we sentient beings drowning in samsara must never be seduced by property. Otherwise, we can never extricate ourselves, no matter what kind of practitioner you are. Actually, whether practice is good or not really has a certain relationship with property. If property is not too much, at least you also have time for practice. If wealth is especially abundant, I have encountered many relatively wealthy lay practitioners. Their spiritual roots are quite good. They very much want to properly spread the Dharma or earnestly cultivate themselves. But there are too many affairs around them, and if your wealth is too much, you can't sleep at night and keep thinking during the day, including during retreat, when meditating on the preciousness of human life with eyes closed, the mind keeps thinking, how should I handle my money? Will the company? How much will I earn this year? How should I maintain this car next month? Your mind is constantly filled with thoughts about matters related to property. So sometimes we truly rejoice in those living in caves, in pure mountain forests, where apart from the Dharma and their own liberation, there is nothing else in their mental sphere, their world, except for some greed, anger, and ignorance that may naturally arise in the mind stream, which exist innately for ordinary beings. Apart from this, there is almost nothing. So for people with especially abundant wealth, practice becomes very difficult. I've seen many cases. I heard that some wealthy people go to pure places for retreat, but it's not retreat at all. They keep operating in the cave. If they retreat for 21 days, basically all 21 days are spent using 3 mobile phones and constantly giving directions. If this is what happens in the cave, then needless to say, when they come out, using 3 mobile phones in a cave while practicing virtue, what kind of virtue is this 3 virtues? Everyone should know, right? I used 3 virtues as a pun. In a cave, 3 mobile phones practicing virtue. What kind of virtue is there? You understand, right? I used 4 instances of virtue. So for us practitioners, property indeed scatters our energy. The suffering of accumulating, protecting, and exhausting. Know that much wealth brings misfortune. Greed for gold scatters people. Liberation from suffering becomes remote. Shantideva also said that matters of accumulating and exhausting property are extremely numerous. So this suffering is boundless. We should know that property is the root of all misfortune. Therefore, people who are attached to money definitely have scattered energy. What do you frequently visualize in your discriminating thoughts? Money. The Buddha or sublime meditative states may not necessarily appear. As soon as you close your eyes, there's the sound of renminbi rustling, and then all those states will not appear. In this way, your liberation becomes very distant. Therefore, some of us may have merit from past lives. So in this life, our livelihood is neither very difficult nor very wealthy. We should have just the right conditions favorable for practice. I really rejoice in some Dharma friends here who eat quite well, don't accumulate excessively, and have just enough each month, right? The amount of property a person owns brings equivalent suffering if property keeps increasing, just as taught in the letter to a friend. The more jewels on the Naga king's head, the more hot sand there is equally. For example, the owner of one horse will worry about it being seized by enemies or stolen by thieves, and constantly needing to feed it grass, insufficient fodder, and so forth. All day long he is filled with worries. Although having only one horse, it adds countless troubles to himself. Patrul Rinpoche often says, 1 horse has the suffering of 1 horse, 1 sheep has the suffering of 1 sheep, and 1 brick of tea has the suffering of 1 brick of tea. This is also his meaning. Similarly, owning 1 sheep also brings the suffering of 1 sheep. Even having just 1 brick of tea will certainly bring the suffering of 1 brick of tea, because the intensity of your suffering is also completely different. For example, if your entire property is 1 brick of tea, your suffering is not very great. But if it's 1 sheep, or 1 house, 1 car, or 1 airplane, I have met many Americans with private jets before. The suffering in their hearts is even greater than the airplane. They worry tremendously. You might have seen when His Holiness went to America. Didn't he ride in a private jet at that time? There were 2 elderly people. It seems their daughter had married a Tibetan tulku. The 2 of them had quite good property, but the old man would always say, "My airplane this, my airplane that." His wife got a bit annoyed. "You're already old, how?" They told me at that time, "Your hair has all turned white, and you're still talking about this." Generally, Americans have rather reddish hair, so red mixed with white is actually quite attractive. Then she said, "Your hair has become like this, and you still talk about it every day." What if I don't talk about it every day? Look at our car now, our airplane, how this and that. I heard the 2 of them quarreled every day. But actually, indeed, many people live under tremendous pressure. For example, if a person has an ordinary car, the usual maintenance and upkeep is not very painful. If your car costs over $1 million, a small scratch on it, how much would it cost to repair? Then fuel, tolls, how much money must be paid each month? Now many people like to buy a villa or the most luxurious house. The more luxurious it is, the greater the expenses and the greater the psychological pressure. The greater the pressure, the greater the suffering actually becomes. But many people don't have this understanding. They feel that as their suffering increases, they become happier. They have this feeling. So in the process of seeking happiness, people not only fail to obtain happiness, but actually encounter suffering. Therefore, true practitioners indeed have a certain happiness in their lives. This happiness is an inner happiness, and it is also a kind of freedom, also a way of life. Once Patrul Rinpoche, Jigme Gyalwai Nyugu, and Jigme Ngotsar Gyatso, the three of them went to a certain place. But externally they appeared like beggars, wearing very simple and tattered clothes. At that time they happened to encounter a family whose family member had died. Unable to find other monastics, they invited these three beggars to their home. At that time, it seems Patrul Rinpoche began working at the stove, because when someone dies, many tormas must be made for the liberation ritual. When making tormas, a daughter of the family came. This daughter was also very young. Seeing a beggar working at the stove, she was particularly disgusted. Her spiritual connection was probably quite weak. She said, "What are you beggars doing in my house? Get out!" Then she kicked Patrul Rinpoche. Then Patrul Rinpoche, as if nothing had happened, smiled and moved slightly, then continued working. After finishing, the three of them performed the liberation ritual with compassion. After the liberation ritual was completed indeed, because of the power of their practice, the deceased's Brahma aperture began to open at the crown, showing many signs of liberation. At that time, the family felt both regretful and realized that these three were remarkable, great, accomplished beings. Then they offered 3 horses and 1 yak. At that time, Patrul Rinpoche began to say, 3 horses have the suffering of 3 horses. I don't need such suffering. He didn't accept them. The host then asked the 3 masters where they came from and what their names were. Patrul Rinpoche only mentioned the names of his 2 teachers, but didn't mention his own name at all. This appears in his biography. You can read it when convenient. So Patrul Rinpoche's life philosophy was not only taught, but actually practiced as ascetic practices, truly content with little desire. So many of us can say this orally, but actually there are some who can do it and many who cannot. Therefore, most of us should think about our own lives and become relatively simple practitioners in the future. Having a relatively simple life is very important. The other day, although this is a worldly teaching, I felt that Einstein's statement in my worldview is still very useful. No matter who it is, a simple life is beneficial for everyone. I could recite it well the other day, but now I've forgotten a bit. More or less like that. That's the meaning. So this worldly scientist also thinks this way. In the end, life reaches its natural state. Also, there was a wealthy person from Austria who had over 3 million pounds, about 30 million yuan in Chinese currency. In the end, he gave all his assets to society and lived a very impoverished life himself. In the end, people could feel that he was actually truly seeking a happy life. They had never received Mahayana Buddhist education on contentment with little desire. Like Washington, whom I mentioned before, when they observe with their own wisdom, they realize that money and fame actually brings suffering to people, not necessarily true happiness. Most confused people in cities don't understand this principle. They 100% believe that property brings immeasurable happiness to our mood and life. Many people think this way. If we tell them otherwise, they would definitely consider it blasphemy against the wish-fulfilling jewel. You're talking about money? This is money. Don't say that. This is money. 100 yuan. They say this, as it states, if without property, far from enemies. If a person is poor as a church mouse, then he absolutely won't have harassment from enemies. There's no need to lock the door before going out to listen to teachings. Wherever you go, you can just leave the door open. Going out for many days is also no problem because there's nothing very precious inside. This is a state of practice. It is truly an immense happiness. In the Tang dynasty, there was a Chan master named Xuan Lang. I heard that throughout his life he lived in a small room, and for over 40 years he only wore 1 7-strip robe. Throughout his life, his bedding and these simple requisites were never changed. Apart from studying some scriptures, he had no other activities. Apart from paying respects to and worshipping the Buddha, nothing could shake him. Apart from reciting mantras, he had no other miscellaneous speech. Actually, the precious treasury of pith instructions also teaches that our body, speech, and mind should be devoted entirely to the Dharma, without any other worldly activities that create karma. How wonderful that would be, but many of us cannot do it. 80% of our speech is meaningless, or even creates negative karma. Then 80% of our actions may not necessarily be meritorious but create karma. Our mental thinking also involves countless distracting thoughts with nothing useful. So we ordinary beings have many faults that need correcting. Don't think that after practicing for a few days or taking refuge for a few days you can say, I've taken refuge for 100 days now. Why haven't I become enlightened yet? Thinking that you should become enlightened immediately after taking refuge. And when you become enlightened, you won't be attached to anything and will have seen through everything. It's not like this. Practice is a long path. Everyone shouldn't be eager for quick success and don't constantly feel discouraged. We don't dare say we practice very well, but over a long time we've had some experience in this area, just like a teacher who has taught for 20 or 30 years. What the entire teaching process is like should be quite clear in his mind. So those who have just become monks, just been ordained, just taken refuge, we understand some people's mindset. We also understand that their hearts are very urgent. They immediately want to seek accomplishment with instant results. I chanted Vajrasattva's mantra all last night. Om Vajrasattva Hum Mait Homan. But this morning when I thought about it, why didn't I dream last night? I still haven't seen Vajrasattva. What's the reason? Is it because my karma is too heavy or because some of my behaviors are not in accordance with the Dharma? Teacher, could you please give me some guidance? Don't be too impatient. So when we understand the suffering of meeting the unwanted in a broad sense, it refers to all unwanted experiences we encounter in this world. Such sufferings are extremely numerous. We probably couldn't finish describing them all. The Buddha said in the Sutra of the Right Mindfulness of Dharma, meeting with hatred and the unloved is like great fire and poison. The suffering thus produced cannot be expressed. The suffering produced by this is indescribable. So-called suffering of meeting the unwanted is actually an unwanted kind of suffering. Just as we don't want to encounter a great fire burning down our house, we also don't want to take poison that harms our body, and we don't want the person we have the worst relationship with to appear before our eyes today. We also don't want it when, for example, during our normal study and contemplation or normal work, something very unpleasant and unsatisfactory suddenly appears. These are all the nature of samsara. We must never complain about heaven and people. I'm so unlucky. My doing good deeds has no meaning at all. Why is it that when I do good deeds I always bump into things, always end up bleeding and suffering? Yet when others do evil deeds they have no retribution at all. This law of cause and effect that good deeds bring good results is unreasonable. Don't slander like this. Everything should follow natural laws, but these natural laws ripen at different times with different causes and conditions. At this time, experiences and happiness will appear. So I feel that as practitioners, constantly observing our own minds is particularly important. At the same time, we must understand the various worldly causes and conditions of the external world. If you don't understand these causes and conditions, you will often likely develop wrong views about the true Dharma. If you develop wrong views about the true Dharma, this is caused by your not understanding the principles of phenomena. Therefore, the Sutra on the question of Maitreya states that we cannot develop wrong views about the Dharma because some people's behavior is bad. We cannot develop wrong views about the Dharma because different causes and conditions are unfavorable. So our Dharma is 100% correct, but practitioners sometimes may not necessarily reach the states described in the Dharma. Similarly, if we ourselves do not recognize the particularly precious and rare teachings that the Buddha has bestowed upon us, if we don't obtain these teachings, although nominally you are a monastic or a lay practitioner, or consider yourself a particularly remarkable wise person, the path we seek in our daily lives may be in another direction. In short, we stand at the crossroads of humanity. One side is darkness, the other is light. What kind of path you choose is definitely in your own hands. Some of the content here I composed into a Song of Life release some time ago, so I just remembered and quietly used a bit of it. I don't know if you noticed. Life release. So we must follow the footsteps of the Buddhas and noble predecessors who appeared in the past. We should eradicate attachment to property and possessions. And, like birds seeking daily food, practice the true Dharma with no ties or worries. So all of us here have generated bodhicitta. Some have become monastics, some have not. But attachments to family life and various worldly matters should be somewhat reduced. Some lay practitioners, after learning some Dharma, say, I have now become a very pure practitioner with no ties, no obstacles, no attachments, a quite good lay practitioner. I'm not praising myself, but I have several good qualities. First, I never quarrel with people in my family, including my parents and children. Second, I never watch TV, movies, series, or even news. Third, after going to work or doing meaningful things, I never go shopping. So, through these 3 points, I consider myself a very remarkable practitioner. Some people indeed say this, so as city dwellers, they also position themselves this way. I think those in the mountains, including many monastics here, are truly remarkable. To see through this life, to look lightly upon one's family and current trivial matters, this is not an easy thing. Sometimes when I see each Dharma friend, I think these people still have good spiritual roots and are quite remarkable. When they were at home with their families, their parents also considered them their true treasures. For many years, all their hopes were placed on you. But after you grew up, your hair flew into the sky, and perhaps in your parents' hearts, a tear slowly flowed into the blood of their hearts. But actually these are also tears of merit. Gradually, this should be beneficial for both self and others. So I think many of us should hope not to become those with conflicting lifestyles. Whether you are monastic or lay, studying Buddhism is indeed a very rare opportunity. Sometimes when we stand at crossroads and see the bustling crowds coming and going, among them 1 in 10,000, 1 in 1,000, how many people truly generate lightning-like good thoughts in their mind streams? And those who completely abandon everything and practice Mahayana Buddhism in pure places are even fewer. So in our process of practice, we should try our best to cut attachments to possessions and relatives, like birds seeking food, living day by day in their search. Basically like this. For us here to practice completely day by day might be somewhat difficult, but basically, like many practitioners in Tibet in the past, they prepared winter food in summer, then the next year they would go to the city to seek alms and spend winter in retreat. There are such cases. So if a person has sufficient confidence in terms of livelihood, as taught in Gateway to Training the Mind, it should not bring great difficulties. Therefore, the only most important thing is to live a pure life through contentment with little desire. The Buddha said, among all wealth, contentment is most supreme. Right? Is that correct? You're not? The Buddha said, among all wealth, contentment is most supreme. Good. Let's stop here today. We should earnestly contemplate and repeatedly meditate on the above principles.
Sonamdei tamse bhagaya tanayite dhamma jirgama jiramo chupai jupun zonen dwajyo
Bandharangara Badna Asavarda Bandharangara Badna Asavarda Bandharangara Badna Asavarda